All right, I can't see what you guys are seeing. Oh, here we go. All right, so our presenters today are Matt Bassina and Jacob Nordic. They will be presenting on a presentation on the Fargo Main Avenue Reconstruction Project, which was the winner of the NCITE 2020 Transportation Achievement Award. Matt Bassina is a principal at SRF and currently leads SRF's Transportation Planning section. Matt has over 17 years of traffic engineering and planning experience throughout the Midwest. His holistic approach to transportation allows him to effectively collaborate with diverse stakeholders and find creative solutions to challenging problems. Matt has been a part of numerous award-winning projects, including Highway 1321 project in Prior Lake, the US 2 and 18 street underpass in Williston, and the reconstruction of Main Avenue in Fargo. Matt has also recently worked on other key projects such as the Ford Site Multimodal Transportation Assessment, Vikings Lake AUAR, and Event Management Plan, and the statewide Safe Routes to School Engineering Study. For Main Avenue, Matt led the traffic and transportation analysis, evaluating a wide variety of infrastructure alternatives while also developing visualizations for stakeholder communication and buy-in. Jacob Nordic has over 15 years of civil engineering experience with focus on urban and highway design. Jacob is currently a principal at SRF Consulting and leads the North Dakota regional offices in Fargo and Bismarck. Jacob has led projects with municipalities, counties, and DOTs on numerous interstate, highway, and urban street reconstruction projects throughout North Dakota and Minnesota. For Fargo Main Avenue, Jacob served as project manager, overseeing all aspects of the project and led stakeholder and public engagement. Jacob has been involved in award-winning projects such as the reconstruction of Fargo Main Avenue, Tower Road Bridge and Street Project in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, US Highway 2 and 18 Street Underpass, the I-35W and Highway 62 Crosstown Commons in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jacob is a 2017 graduate of the American Council of Engineering Companies, AECE of North Dakota Emerging Leadership Institute. We do plan on having a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So you guys can either drop your questions in the chat and I'll moderate those once this is over, or once the presentation is over, or you can feel free to hold them and then ask directly at the end. Matt and Jacob, I'll now turn it over to you guys.
All right, I'm going to share my screen then. Bear with me. Everything work? You guys see it?
Looks good to me.
All right. Well, we'll get going here. I know we have there's a lot to cover on this project. It's a very involved project, very great project for the city of Fargo and for the state of North Dakota. But we'll try and get through it and have enough time here to discuss the project and any questions anybody does have. So this project was really a collaboration and a joining effort between the city of Fargo and the North Dakota DOT. SRF was selected to complete the environmental preliminary and final design of the corridor. And we did have a lot of partners included in this. Just at SRF alone, I think we had 10 different functional groups working on the project at some point in time throughout the duration. Some of our partners included Apex Engineering. They were involved and oversaw the utility coordination, and then also reconstructed all of the utilities, the underground utilities, such as the sanitary and water main for the city of Fargo. Braun Intertech was a geotech on the team, and they did site assessment for contaminated soils, as well as ground penetrating radar to identify underground basements that protrude into the right of way and how we can deal with those. Juniper was our environmental consultant that oversaw and provided the cultural resources report. And gateway planning was added later on, and we'll talk about that a little bit here as we go, to do a redevelopment and economic analysis of the corridor. So just before we get into it, some of the foundation that was set for this project prior to when we started it, the Fargo Main Avenue Corridor Study, which was completed for FM MetroCog, Council of Governments, in the Fargo-Moorhead area. It was completed in 2013, and this project was identified as a key need for the city. Some aspects that drove that need were poor pavement conditions, city utilities. The city utilities, such as the sanitary and water main, were approaching 100 years old. They were original from when they were constructed way back when, and they were in need of repair and replacement. Sidewalks and ADA compliance were a big concern. And then just the intersection improvements, other corridor improvements to help the corridor and the ever-changing landscape of it. And then in 2017, as part of our work, an updated traffic operations report kind of took that study and really dove into some of the specific details, such as delays associated with the BNSF rail, the crash data and the crash issues that we've had at in Fargo here at these locations at some of the intersections. So those really kind of set the stage for the project to begin. And the project, the study actually covered from 2nd Street, which is near the Red River Bridge, all the way to 25th Street. So this project that we just completed was only a segment of what that corridor study did complete, and there is a movement towards completing that next segment. So the segment we're going to talk about today is from 2nd Street to University Drive. And this was a full reconstruction of the entire corridor, including underground utilities. And it was basically building face to building face reconstruction. Some of those items that were identified in the corridor study were the poor pavement conditions. As you can see in the photos here, the city's had to overlay and repair a lot of this roadway throughout the years with freeze-thaw cycles and a lot of potholing that did occur. As I mentioned before, the city utilities, water and sanitary, were well beyond their life expectancy and were in need of repair. The sidewalks, you can see in a photo here, the sidewalks really do not meet ADA compliance from a surface standpoint or a width standpoint. You can't see it very good here in the photo, but right here is a light pole right in the middle of the sidewalk, and that was pretty consistent along the entire corridor of having light poles or signal poles right in the walking path, violating ADA standards today. So some of the initial project priorities identified when we first started was the utilities, what to do with the on-street parking. There's on-street parking from the segment around 4th Street to A Street. So really a 2-block business corridor type of corridor that had on-street parking. The rest of the corridor did not have parking. So what to do with the current on-street parking, ADA compliance, and then the improvements to maintain acceptable traffic operations. It's currently a 5-lane section. There are some turn lane improvements that were needing to be looked at further, such as at Broadway and 8th Street. One other wrinkle that you throw into the traffic operations is the railroad along the corridor, on the north side of the corridor, as you can see here. So we started the project in 2016 with a schedule of completing the environmental and prelim design at the end of 2016, and then preparing final design and bid packet towards the end of 2017 for a construction to be completed in one season in 2018. And anticipated costs were around $10 million for the reconstruction from the 2nd Street all the way to University. As we got into the environmental process, a lot of things changed throughout the development of not only the traffic, but just the environmental issues. But at the same time, the city had started to develop a downtown in focus plan and really focusing on 7 things of what does downtown need to look like? What are the city's needs and ideas for the future? Grow as a neighborhood, prosper as a business, have Main Avenue or downtown Fargo be a destination center, and then just how you can you can grow, you can have complete streets is part of your redevelopment of downtown. And those are some things that the city was focusing on. At the state level, the governor's initiative, Main Street initiative, was kicked off in 2017, and kind of 3 goals that they wanted to develop for main streets across North Dakota, and that's small towns, that's large communities, building healthy and vibrant communities, 24th century workforce, so providing working opportunities downtown, and then smart, efficient infrastructure, kind of focusing more on that complete streets concept. And this was from the 2013 corridor. This was a complete change of thinking at both the city and the state level. So as part of that, those initiatives from the city and the state, we also started to revisit what's the purpose of this project. Does it really meet the needs of the future? If we're focusing on how can we get traffic through here as quickly as possible, but also providing safety improvements along the corridor. So there were 2 public input meetings. The first was held in April 2017, and then we started to just revisit, and through all the stakeholder input during that time and leading up to that first public input meeting, the feeling of what this corridor needs to be started to change. And there was extensive outreach, community outreach. As I mentioned, the redevelopment and economic analysis did come about, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then just the change in the purpose of this project. And through that, reduced lane, looking at, what do reduced lane considerations, how does that impact the corridor? Not only from a traffic standpoint, but from a pedestrian environment, from a growth, parking, business development. So we started to really engage the property and business owners along the corridor. Here's a map of all the business and property owners along the corridor, and everything in purple. We sat down individually or as groups and talked about it. Over 60 representatives throughout that process, and really gathered information, what's important to each individual business, each individual property owner, and what are their plans for the future as well. So there's multiple follow-up discussions. We also had further discussions as part of the redevelopment and economic analysis, talking with these landowners. And so what this redevelopment and economic analysis did was really focus on what are the opportunities for development if, for say, we'd go with a 5-lane section, which is the current cross section of the roadway. What areas are there potential for development? And then they also looked at, if we do a reduced lane, such as a 3-lane scenario, what are the opportunities out there? As you can see, I did circle the different areas along the main avenue corridor that provide more opportunity than, say, a 5-lane scenario that was identified as part of this economic analysis. So the original purpose of the corridor, what was the purpose of this project when we started? It was, really to mitigate system deficiencies, address the safety issues, improve capacity constraints, and just provide a safe and efficient regional corridor. As this process began, and we began to think outside the box for this corridor, what do we really want to achieve here for the future? We had made some changes to that purpose. Instead of it just being, improving some safety by trying to widen the sidewalks as much as possible. And that could be done in a number of different ways, such as adjusting the alignment to balance the width on each side to provide a more consistent sidewalk width for pedestrians. We looked at how can we make it more active and comfortable and inviting for pedestrians. And that was done through a number of things, through ideas for landscape architecture, that complete streets concept, curb bump outs at the intersections to reduce that crossing for pedestrians. And then really incorporating that redevelopment and economic analysis. How is that going to contribute to an environment that encourages businesses activity, investment, and redevelopment? And then lastly, on the traffic, we wanted to support regional and local traffic needs, but as we looked further into the traffic, the regional traffic, and Matt will probably talk to this in a little bit, the regional traffic, because it is a state highway, US 10, the volumes are very low is from a regional corridor. Most of the trips that were generated are local trips, so local traffic. And with that, it was a good segue to Matt to talk about the traffic.
Thanks, Jake. So since this group is primarily traffic and transportation engineers or planners for the most part, and I thought I'd focus a little bit more on the traffic operations side of things, given that Jake was kind of leading the design efforts there on his end. As he alluded to, that 2013 corridor study, was kind of the common corridor study at the time. Identified a lot of different things, evaluated a lot of different options. As he alluded to, there were a lot of changes that came about here, just from the project priorities and vision that really were realized here as we started to get into this. And so, some of the key changes that even just at, anytime you update a corridor study or anything like that, there's always going to be changes, but there were actually some more significant changes from when that 2013 study was completed. A few of those were, the two adjacent corridors to the north, First Avenue and MP Avenue. Those used to be a one-way pair, and they were converted to essentially two-way operations, kind of a 2+1 configuration. So that had an impact on travel patterns in the downtown area. There were some multimodal improvements. The on-street bike lane was added north-south along 4th Street. That actually changed the lane configuration for 4th Street. And then there were other minor striping or geometric changes at 2nd Street and things like that to kind of facilitate various movements over time. And so, that warranted, along with kind of the other evaluation priorities, really warranted kind of a more in-depth look. So given those modal priorities, we wanted to take a little bit different look at things as well. So what did change when we went through our traffic operations update? It was pretty straightforward of a refresh on the crash and traffic data. We've got this corridor carries anywhere between 15 and 20,000 cars a day. In its current form, it's been pretty stable in that front. Was projected to kind of stay relatively in that range, maybe increase a little bit as well. One other item that we looked at was from a street light, and I think this was one of the first corridors that we actually looked at it in more detail. I think Joe DeVore, actually, when he was with SRF, might have helped us out on this one. But I think one of the key things that came out of it is that even though, yes, it's technically US Highway 10, is that the users of the corridor, it really was a local roadway from a functionality perspective. I think there was only about 5% or less of traffic that was using that segment that we could actually term as maybe a regional type of trip from that OD analysis. So that really helped kind of spur that vision going from maybe more of a mobility function into that more pedestrian, complete street, economic friendly type of vision. Some compounding factors here, to think about. I mean, there's the rail line that's just a couple hundred feet just north of the corridor. At the time, there was probably 65 to 80 trains a day that were running through there. And if you remember, that was kind of at the height of the oil boom as well out in Western North Dakota. And so there were a lot of train and freight activity running through the corridor, which actually has given the at-grade crossings at a couple locations, really played into a lot of what the corridor actually ultimately was built as. There's a lot of parking maneuvers on the corridor, so we actually took some detailed observations to kind of understand how those users were parking, how long they took, and really kind of what the turnover rates were, to really kind of understand that operation, and really built all that information into our modeling components. I think it's something that we kind of do more on a daily basis. I mean, probably back in 2013, we looked at it more on the the ADT level and then at the peak hour level. Nowadays, when you're looking at complete streets, it's more of a how does it operate throughout the day? We're willing to maybe live with a little bit more congestion to provide, congestion during the peak periods or whatnot to have a more favorable environment for peds and bikes and other users on the corridor. So really that's kind of where things were at and how things changed since that 2013 study was completed. So from an alternative perspective, if you want to go to the next slide, Jake. We basically started with 3 primary alternatives: a 5-lane section, which is the 5-lane section, which was more or less what was there today, a 4-lane section, which is essentially a 2+1. So 2 lanes in the eastbound direction, 1 lane in the westbound, and then a continuous center 2-way left turn lane, and then a 3-lane option. So those were kind of our 3 primary ones. As we went through the alternatives analysis, we started to get towards that hybrid, and we'll talk a little bit about that on why we got there. But in general, that hybrid started out as a 5-lane section coming from the west at University Avenue, transitioned to that 4-lane section, being from 9th to 11th, maintaining 2 lanes in the eastbound direction and only a single lane in the westbound. And then ultimately with only a 3-lane section towards the east side, as we get from essentially 2nd Street to 9th Street. So that segment that's kind of how the alternatives shook out. Give you a couple examples on just some graphics that we had developed at the time. I know, granted, these are 4+ years old at this point, so I'm kind of trying to jog my memory as we go through this as well. But this is just some of the tools that we had to use at the time to kind of say, here's how the corridor volumes change by time of day, given kind of capacity level thresholds for what each of those roadway types of configurations can handle from a planning level perspective. And we started to see how the operations would change at different times of the day. Start to look at number of hours of being near capacity or over capacity. And then really letting that kind of compare the different alternatives as we looked at each of the different options. We also developed, some side-by-side simulations. We don't need to go into too much detail, or if you want to click play, Jake, you can do either or. But these were essentially we use these as a tool to kind of help illustrate those operations and how they compare between each of the alternatives. Now, we looked at things with and without train events. And I think Mr. Gordon is on here. We're joking about seeing if we can get him to talk. I don't think he's going to. But the train operations really were and are still to this day a key component to how Main Avenue operates. And when there is a train event, it can lock things up. And so we wanted to be very mindful of, one, making sure we can have enough storage for the vehicles for, to be able to wait for that. But then also how we're trying to understand how quickly it'll recover. When you have those peak periods, are you going to start to create diversion? Are you going to increase it? How, can things recover in a few minutes, a few cycles, or is it just going to blow up and extend into multiple hours? So, understanding that train dynamic was key. And it also spurred on some other improvements that came out of this as well. So from a conclusion perspective, where do we end up? Really the 5-lane and the 2+1 or the 4-lane alternative, whatever you want to call it, that essentially would provide sufficient long-term capacity. The 3-lane option really didn't. And it resulted in some diversion to adjacent corridors. And so really that's where the hybrid alternative came out of. What does it fully meet every single hour of the day? No, it's kind of that balance of all the different needs. We would expect it still would result in some diversion to adjacent corridors. I don't think I've looked at the volume since it's been open and constructed now. But I think, that I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of diversion to some of those other corridors. And then the study also identified some other, operational considerations, with respect to travel time reliability. And I think probably the two main ones that came out of that really was the University Avenue counterflow lane. Really, there is only, Jake, if I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong, but there's really only one underpass today outside, for northbound traffic to cross the railroad tracks. There's a couple at grade crossings, but when you have the volume of train events that they have, finding another more reliable opportunity to utilize, getting into downtown is important. And so we saw that as a critical piece to the success of kind of getting to that hybrid or any lane reduction scenario for that matter.
Yeah, just for magnitude, the grade separated crossings occur at 25th Street, which is off the page here a little bit. University Avenue was a one-way, southbound one-way, so vehicles on Main Avenue couldn't turn to utilize that underpass. There's another underpass at 10th Street. That's a northbound one-way, but that's a grade separated where Main Avenue is on top of 10th Street, so you can't turn. You'd have to use 9th Street to loop around and get to that. And then the other one is at the very limits of the state and by the North Dakota Minnesota border at 2nd. So those are really the two that were there, as we were developing this project, were 25th Street and 2nd Avenue. So that's a 20 some block opportunity there to have no option to turn in a train event and to get north of the trains into the heart of downtown.
Right. Yeah. So pairing along with that, then, as a motorist, you don't necessarily have an idea of, oh, there is a train coming. So there is that opportunity that you could kind of find yourself already into the corridor and all of a sudden, well, there's a train coming and now I'm kind of stuck in downtown to get where I want to go to anyway. So part of another component to this is adding some dynamic wayfinding. We'll show you some graphics of that were incorporated in to kind of help the motorist understand when those train events are happening, to help them change their travel pattern to avoid that type of congestion. And so, there are other key little things that we looked at with respect to parking and access modifications, really just to kind of squeeze every little bit of efficiency out of the system that we could, to make sure that things would work well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jake and let him go. Jake, I know there was a question here in the chat if you want to address it about jurisdictional transfer. Since there's little or regional traffic from, FHWA and the DOT's perspective, do you have any thoughts there?
There was discussion as part of that development during the environmental phase and prelim phase of rerouting Highway 10 traffic to the interstate. There was that discussion, but then you're getting into multi-jurisdiction between North Dakota and DOT and MnDOT as well. And I think that, with the limited number of vehicles utilizing that for regional purposes, that might have played a factor into just keeping it the way it is. They probably already kind of do that movement already to the interstate. But it was explored, but it was deemed that not to do a rerouting of the US highway. I hope that answers questions. All right. So taking all the information that Matt talked about during that environmental phase of looking at all these different traffic patterns, how operations are impacted with the different alternatives. Here's a very high level kind of matrix that was used with the stakeholders to really break down, okay, what are the roadway characteristics, what are the needs that we really want to achieve here, and how do each of these alternatives impact it. So this is kind of a high level. There was a much more intense matrix with a whole bunch of different categories and scoring criteria that was used as part of the selection and breakdown. But this was kind of a summary of that, with, you know, the green obviously being optimal, yellow being, you know, moderate, and then the red being poor. You know, and we looked at it 3 different ways: the vehicular mobility, you know, speed of traffic and the level of congestion, the pedestrian environment, walkability, safety, and aesthetics, that inviting pedestrian environment, and then also the placemaking economics, where that redevelopment and economic analysis came into play. And as you can see here, the scoring is different across the board depending on which lane configuration is chosen. And those lane configurations, you know, the 5-lane, the 4-lane, and the 3-lane, were really that consistent lane configuration through the whole corridor from Second to University. So that's where the development of the 5-4-3 hybrid came into play, because as you kind of go through the corridor in the segments, you know, there's a lot of different needs that the corridor has depending on where you're at along the corridor. So the ultimate decision then was to choose the 5-4-3 lane hybrid design. So I'll go through kind of the layout that lays out all the improvements, all of the lane configurations, where those changes between the 5-lane, the 4-lane, and the 3-lane occur. So starting at the east end by the Red River at 2nd Street, this intersection, when the project started, was a signalized intersection. It was really wide, a really wide intersection, and also was a high crash rate intersection, because you're coming from the hill, off the bridge, coming down into Fargo, and it just was a very large footprint for just a traditional intersection, and to include this current skews at this intersection with 2nd Street. So the city of Fargo, you know, made the suggestion, let's look at a roundabout. You know, we have the room to put a roundabout at this location, and, you know, we were able to achieve placing a fairly sized multi-lane roundabout in this area with little impact to current right-of-way. And then as you can see, the legs of the roundabout, there's different lane assignments, number of lanes, depending on where you're going. And we really analyze that from a traffic standpoint of how can we make this roundabout operational and fit the needs with the different configurations of the number of lanes, and whether it's a drop lane or any of that. So as we head west, coming out of the roundabout, I should backtrack a little bit. Coming out of Minnesota, it is a 4-lane, 2 lanes in each direction. So that's another way at this intersection with the roundabout design, is to, you know, drop lanes or add lanes depending on which direction you're going. So as you can see, there's a drop lane to head up to 2nd Street, to then get into this 3-lane section. And this 3-lane section goes all the way from 2nd Street all the way to 9th Street, and really that business corridor. So as we go around here, the 3-lane section provided opportunities for wider pedestrian facilities, opportunities to do tree planting and landscaping, and you'll see some of that on some of the finished photos as we go here. Intersection of 4th Street was reconstructed, and as you can see at all these intersections for the 3-lane section, curb bump outs were added to shorten that crossing distance across Main Avenue. Another item that you'll notice here is the number of parking. So we have 3 lanes with parking on both sides. The parking situation that was out there, the existing condition, really only had about 18 to 20 spots, and that really started here by Broadway, and then went to 8th Street. And it was only parking on the south end. With this project, we, I think, added over 100 total. There was 150 additional parking spots added. So a very significant increase in parking along the corridor. The next kind of part of as you head towards the west, here is 9th Street, and that's where you see that break where you're having your 3-lane section going, and then 9th Street becomes that 4-lane where you have two lanes in the eastbound direction. And we chose this spot to drop that 2nd lane as you're heading to the east at 9th Street, because again, if you recall the different grade separated crossings that are available around the corridor, this would allow eastbound traffic that wanted to head north to downtown Fargo to utilize this 9th Street kind of loop to that northbound one-way 10th Street underpass to get to the north. And then as you get to about 12th Street, that development of the 5 lanes, so going from the 2+1 to the 5 lanes to tie into existing conditions near University Drive. So as part of that extravagant and involved stakeholder and public engagement, we really utilize 3D visualizations to really get a sense of what do each of these alternatives look like, and kind of get that sense of what does that feel? Does it fit the corridor needs? I'm going to run a simulation here of the 543 hybrid, and then following that, I'll run a drone video of the completed construction, so you can kind of see how that vision early in the process came about and what it looks like in the end. So for the 543 hybrid, now it's not going to show the roundabout because that was a separate visualization. So it is going to show the 2nd Street intersection just as it was there previously. I apologize if it's choppy with the internet connections and whatnot, but and I think it's going a little faster than what it normally would have when we were presenting it. But you kind of get an idea of kind of in that western or that eastern segment of the corridor, it's really a downtown multi-use facility generating, pedestrian traffic, businesses, and then apartments up on top. Right there is the Park Depot. It's an old train depot that serves as the Park District's offices, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. It's going to show a simulation of that pedestrian crossing, the shorter crossing. So if you can imagine out there today, you have additional lanes that pedestrians have to cross, but with these curb bump outs, obviously you shorten that crossing, make it a safer crossing. And then now we're getting closer to that. We're that 4-lane section right there that ends. You can see the look of the corridor is more open, less multi-use facilities. That's where it's going to stop. So you can see just from that visualization, just the changes along the corridor itself, going from that downtown business district to more open commercial type businesses. So I'm going to run this simulation or this drone footage that we took after the project was done, and this is from Broadway to about 8th Street. So I'll run that as well. One thing too, this 7th Street, I'll pause it here as we get there. Now there's a train running north of the project for this video. Oh, I lost it. Get back to it here. So this is a 7th Street. This was a signalized intersection as well, but as part of the improvements, one of the options was to remove that traffic signal, and that did get implemented. But we did also allow a crossing because of the amount of foot traffic that goes to the Park District at the train depot there. As you can see, there's also this area right here in front of the depot used to be a turnaround, kind of a get off of Main, kind of a pull-up area here where you could drop off, park your vehicle, get in the building, and then get out. From a capacity and traffic operations, we decided to remove that and provide a more streetscape design, more inviting for pedestrians, and help out the look in front of the depot. You know, with this being early, you know, there's a lot of plantings and stuff in these planting beds that haven't fully developed when this drone was taken, but there was other options to also reconstruct the entire front of the park depot as an addition to the project, but funding after bids didn't allow that to be incorporated entirely. But they do have the plans and can do it in the future if funding does become available. All right. So here's the roundabout as it sits today, the completed roundabout. I guess something to note here too, there were other projects going on in this location. So there was additional coordination that had to be going on when this was being designed. This right here is a lift station that was being designed and constructed at the same time as this project was for Fargo Main Avenue, and there was a lot of coordination. This was a lift station that was part of the FM diversion and flood projects throughout the city, along with the bridge. This is the part of the Veterans Memorial Bridge, but all these improvements in this area as well occurred around the same time as the design and construction of here. So there's coordination. I think this piece right here was part of that flood diversion project. So we had to coordinate the roundabout and the sidewalk to tie into that design. So here's a few elements of the roundabout. You got your center island, just pictures of the different legs. Also the 2nd Street underpass. I do have a simulation for the operation of that roundabout to show as well. I'll let that run. This is taken from our drone as well. As you can see, there was a lot of delay previously when this used to be a signalized intersection, and then having to do those left turns to 2nd and having oncoming traffic. This just provides a safer intersection control, not only for the traffic, but also the pedestrians. Pedestrians only have to look one way when crossing, so that provides additional benefits as well. Along with the splitter islands, I provide a refuge as well for those pedestrians. You can't really see it very much in this video, but you know, this grade drops down pretty quickly. I think it's around a 6% drop in trying to get to that underpass. That provided some design challenges as well when designing the roundabout. As Matt alluded to before, the counterflow lane at University Drive. So this is a southbound one-way street, University Drive is, and in order to utilize the benefits of having a grade separated crossing with the railroad, we incorporate a left turn movement onto that. So a counterflow lane that then just outlets into the NP Avenue, just the block north of it, maintaining this one-way operation for the rest of the corridor, but having that traffic get onto NP so they have access to downtown and not have delays associated with trains. The 10th Street Bridge. This was also interesting. The bridge deck was replaced as part of this project, and this bridge deck is a one-of-a-kind bridge in all of North Dakota. I think it's was built in the 1920s, and it was a very shallow bridge deck. It was actually a steel grate bridge deck, and we had to replace that steel grate. It was previously filled with concrete. at some point, and then we replaced it with the same type of bridge deck because of the it's a thinner deck. Putting a traditional deck on this would have raised the profile of the roadway significantly. So that was a unique aspect of this, and the railings around here as well were identified as, you know, culturally significant. So we had to make sure we limited any impacts to that bridge rail. Utility replacement was a big piece of the utility, a big piece of the project. As you can see from this 3D utility layout, pretty involved design with storm, sanitary, water main, and then all private utilities to go along with that. And this really spurred the construction phasing of how we build this project. Initially, we were trying to build it under traffic, and while we were replacing these, ultimately the decision was to close segments of main to construct this. But as you can see, you know, you're getting pretty deep into the roadway, and some pretty big excavations that go along with that. And Apex Engineering was in charge of doing that design. Landscape and lighting was a big piece of the streetscaping, the complete streets portion. A lot of tree plantings along the corridor, planting beds, benches, trash receptacles, a lot of different improvements. And then part of that as well was the redevelopment and reconstruction of this Park Depot site. It was a separate entity to the project. The design was completed, but like I said, the project didn't move forward yet due to lack of funding for it. But hopefully in the future that this improvements along the front of the building do come about. Now ITS and innovative designs that were part of this corridor. So new fiber optic communication system along the entire corridor. We installed a train warning system that really ties into those digital message signs, the DMS, and the signal preemption. So we have 3 sites of DMS on the very west end of the project, just west of University Drive, the project limit of where the reconstruction was. Here between the 10th Street underpass and 11th Street, and where that 4-lane section ends, we have another DMS sign to direct traffic to utilize this 10th Street underpass, but also to alert them of the drop of the lane as well. And then at the very east end of the project, just coming out of Minnesota, another DMS for vehicles to utilize that 2nd Street underpass. And those are all tied into the preemption. So when the signals get word that a train is in the area, that message then also gets sent to the DMS signs. There was a Hawk pedestrian signal that was added, and that is right here. The nearest crossings for where this Hawk was installed were A Street and University. So there's a big gap in this area, and right here is a Asian market where a lot of grocery and Asian market here. So there's a lot of pedestrian traffic that just crossed Main Avenue or had crossed Main Avenue just at non identified crossing locations. So this is a benefit to bring some safety aspects to it. And then also some camera sites were added and upgraded at University, at Broadway, and also at 2nd Street. Some upgrades at those locations. Here are a few photos. Here's the Hawk crossing, pedestrian crossing, at kind of that mid block of where A Street and University Drive are. And then here are the DMS signs, and this is the one just before the lane drop from the 2+1. As you can see, here's a right lane ends ahead sign that's up there when there's not a train. When a train does enter the site, that triggers the messages to alert traffic to use different routes. So at the end of the project, throughout the process, I'm kind of bringing up this slide again of, when we first started, what was that schedule? And with all the changes and discussions with the stakeholder and the change in vision, this is what the final schedule looked like. So the environmental and preliminary design basically went on another 1.5 years to really evaluate all the items along the corridor. That was completed in August of 2018. And the construction was originally scheduled for a 1-year construction. And, as we're looking at the amount of work in these big confined areas from building face to building face, it was ultimately decided to split up that project into 2 construction seasons. So the final plans and bid were split up. January 2019, from Red River to Broadway, that project was sent out to bid and constructed in the year 2019 for 10.3 million about 10.3 million construction costs. And as that was being constructed, we were completing that last segment from Broadway to University, which we completed towards the end of August of 19. And that project was recently constructed and finished up here towards the end of September of 2020. So it was 11.6 million for that segment. So if you recall from the previous slide, they were thinking about $10 million to reconstruct this. And then the change in vision really added a lot of different features to the project. And with the construction costs, the engineering, and the right-of-way purchasing, I think it was around 28 million was the final cost of the project. And I guess the city is already seeing benefits to the improvements that were made. Right now, under construction is this site here, and plans to move forward. I think the city is working with an architect right now that they hired to redevelop the corner of Main and Broadway. And then this site here was an old McDonald's site, which has been removed. And it sits vacant, but there's going to be some opportunities for redevelopment there. So the city is already seeing the benefits that this project has offered, and everything that we've foreseen occurring is already beginning to occur. The project has really gotten a lot of support from the community, from the mayor, from Jeremy Gordon with the city of traffic engineer from the city of Fargo, and who's on the call here today. And also at the state level, the governor has recognized it because it really meets that vision at the state level of Main Street Initiative, and has gotten a lot of great support and a lot of good feelings for the future, not only for this corridor, but for other Main Street corridors throughout the state of North Dakota. And that concludes our presentation. So I hope that we'll have some good conversation and questions that we can discuss.
So we only had the one question in the chat, so anyone can jump in here and voice any questions they have for either Jacob or Matt.
I got a good one for probably Matt, but did you guys ever do kind of a before and after on the origin destination data that you collected for this project, and kind of looking at how that interacted with the city of Moorhead and which bridge was being used for Trunk Highway 10 trips?
Joe, we didn't do any before and after on that, to my knowledge. It's like it was the project's only been open for a little while now, so we haven't fully vetted it at this point. I'm sure it's something that you'll dive into.
Just curious.
But I mean, it's already, this project in Fargo has already, contributed to ideas over on the other side of the river in Minnesota. They're currently under contract to begin looking at reconstructing their main avenue from the Red River Bridge, to A Street and eventually to the underpass at 11th. That'll be coming up, becoming a reality here now that they have funding as well. So it really has, I guess, changed, the thought process of what improvements do we need? What is our focus when we are doing improvements to roadways? Is it traffic? Is it pedestrians? Is it business development? It's really changed the landscape of how we approach these types of urban projects.
Matt or Jeremy, if you remember at all, I think John Atkins has said that Main Avenue in Moorhead has had some relief in their congestion as well because of the roundabout and some of that. So they have seen benefits on their end as well.
Yep. I do see a couple questions that came in. Maybe not a question, but just the futuristic vehicles and the 3D simulation. That was intentional, showing those types of vehicles for the future. And then another question: how did they fund the cost difference for that? From what the project started and what it ended up. And I think they moved around a lot of funds, federal and state funds that were probably allocated towards other projects. I don't know if Jeremy wanted to chime in on the funding side of things from the city standpoint, because they participated in the cost component of it as well. But that was kind of for the higher levels at the state level to figure out how to fund it. But I know that they did change a lot of projects timelines and funding that was there to fund this one, and that's really the holdup on the next segment as well, is trying to secure those funds for that next segment from University to 25th.
Yeah, this is Jeremy. Can I talk for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully Matt or Jake and whoever lost the bet and I wasn't going to speak. So this government official here, Fargo, North Dakota. I've been here since 2004. I got to tell you, this ended up being a great project. For those folks here at NCITE, looks like there's a lot of young faces. Don't be afraid to change what exists today. So these guys obviously are high paid consulting engineers, pretty long-winded, but what we ended up doing here was basically a very good complete street. Sidewalks were awful. They were 5 feet wide max in some locations, and some of them had a streetlight right in the middle of them, not ADA compliant. We took roadway away and gave it to parked cars for businesses and gave it to sidewalk on both sides of the street. We knew we were going to impact some vehicles, so we came up with those softening of congestion, you might say. So the roundabout idea, you got rid of a traffic signal. I think that roundabout just is a great design, and SRF folks probably got sick of me whining about the design and the layout, but I knew this was going to be a very focal piece of coming into Fargo and the design of the project. And as we were opening the project up, there was a snowstorm that hit like the first weekend. But the design ended up being great. It was reviewed some more. So that was great. So we softened up the traffic, stop and go over there. We got rid of the signal at 7th Street. So we went from a quarter that had 5 signals to a quarter that had 3 signals. The counterflow, grade separations, people pay tens of millions of dollars for grade separation, and we had a one-way there, and we simply wouldn't let people take it. So it was 5 lanes wide one way. So we thought, hey, there's plenty of room to make an easy little block maneuver to get north of the tracks. So that softened the blow from reducing the lanes. So ultimately, and this project, a concrete project, there's a SRF's LA group put together the planting plan. It really is a very good project to certainly be proud of. So from the funding perspective, it went from a 10 to a $25 million project, essentially. The city really wasn't on the hook for it much more than we had planned. The state really had to shuffle some funds around statewide to make up that difference. And we delayed a different state aid project for a year, so they kind of had to shuffle things around statewide.
Yep. And with the project being constructed in 2 seasons, I think they're able to move funds around in that aspect as well.
Yep, from one year's budget to 2 years budget. Yep, that did help. So one couple other things is, we're obviously Moorhead, Minnesota's across the Red River. So at the same time this project was basically getting developed, we, believe it or not, we had a toll bridge, tolls in North Dakota. So we had a private bridge builder 30 years ago put a bridge up on a section line a mile north of Main Avenue. And the toll, I think, was 75 cents. So that came off right as this was starting. And the ADT on the bridge was around 1,500 cars a day. And that basically ballooned up to 10,000 in pretty short order. So, I mean, going from 1,500 to 10,000, that helps with the east-west traffic into this vicinity. So that aided. And then Sanford Hospital, they had their main hospital downtown here. They expanded, put a $500 million facility on 94 west of town. So a lot of jobs left downtown because of that. So, and now that COVID hit and everybody's working from their kitchens and basements and closets. I think I see Matt in his closet there. Traffic downtown is significantly reduced. I would imagine traffic on Main Avenue is half of what it used to be. We should actually do some counts, but things do change over time. So I guess that's the moral of the story. Don't be stuck in your ways forever.
I'm actually working from a houseboat, Jeremy, by the way.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments?
Or do you want to see any of the other simulations again? I could bring them up.
Yeah, you're welcome to show them. Much like Tyler, I really love those drone videos and seeing all that. It's really slick and so much cooler to see it that way than just the static pictures.
Yeah, I had more drone videos, but it was starting to lag down the presentation, and we ran a practice run, and some of it was kind of choppy, so I got rid of a few of them.
This is Ken Levin with Hennepin County here. I have a question about just the drone video stuff. Did you get that hired, or do you have someone who can license to fly a drone?
Yep, we have licensed pilots at SRF in both our Minneapolis office and our North Dakota offices. I think we have a total of 4 drones with our company, 2 of them in North Dakota, 1 in Fargo, 1 in Bismarck, and then we have 2 down in the cities. So yeah, we actually flown them. We have 4 pilots in North Dakota. We actually had those guys go out there and take drone photos and the video for that. As part of that's fairly new, a couple of years now that we've had those capabilities. But when we developed those 3D animations for the public and stakeholder involvement, we did hire drone footage. We did hire that out and then incorporated that footage and developed those 3D models utilizing that footage. So, but now we have those capabilities in house. Yep.
Jacob, there's another question added to the chat. It said, what agencies did you have to get permission from in order to fly those flyovers with the drones?
It's a good question, and I'm probably not the right person to answer it, but you know, FAA, you have to get permissions. I know not. I don't think we had to for North Dakota, but on the Minnesota side, we flew Main Avenue corridor there, and we weren't able to fly all of it because of just restrictions that MnDOT had with flying over that. And then there's other restrictions too with height of where you can fly. You can't fly over, you know, certain things and whatnot. But from what I recall from our pilots, it was mostly FAA.
I have a quick question. This is Sarah Ehrman with HDR. So I was born, raised in North Dakota, went to NDSU. And I know whenever I say roundabout, I get a lot of hate from people in North Dakota. Was there a lot of issues with city involvement and getting the community on board?
Yep, there was a lot of, I mean, I shouldn't say a lot. I mean, there was some pushback from the public on a roundabout. They thought it was a terrible idea, and you know, just I think it's just the lack of education that goes along with how they operate, how you operate them. And we actually put up one of our cameras at the site here after it opened up, and we have some pretty good footage of vehicles going the wrong way, turning left, you know, right at the splitter island and going the wrong direction. And you know, it's kind of hysterical, but it's kind of concerning too that, you know, there's an opportunity there for a crash. But yeah, you're gonna get those, I think, regardless. But I think overall, I don't know if the city has heard any complaints with the roundabout. You know, the biggest concern too with the roundabout being, you know, where we're at and in the Midwest is the maintenance and snow removal. Is kind of a little concern that we heard from the city of Fargo's maintenance department as developing that. But we got it, like Jeremy said, they got a taste of it right when it opened up because we had a big snowstorm shortly after that. So, but you know, overall, I think the overall reaction to the roundabout is it's working great and people like it. You're not sitting at a stoplight, because before you'd sit at a stoplight and you'd be waiting there for a while, and even if no traffic's coming, but now you just move freely through it. I use it every day. It's actually just right down the block here from our offices, and I use it every day, so it works great. Any more planned roundabouts in Fargo?
I can answer that one.
There you go.
As of right this moment, there aren't any planned.
How many roundabouts in Fargo do you guys have, Jeremy?
I think we have 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And trust me, you can design them wrong, incorrectly. So we've got 3 of them that people aren't too crazy about on Veterans Boulevard in Southwest Fargo. We've learned a lesson.
Yeah.
Even if you do single lane roundabouts, make them big. But believe it or not, it's 50-50 love-hate. Some people half love them, half hate them. It's really what's the most appropriate design for the intersection. Up here, the biggest thing to worry about is the blowing and drifting snow. North side of town here, snow can come all the way from Grand Forks, 15-mile-an-hour wind. So we really have to worry about the drifting. I don't know if MnDOT, Minnesota has to worry about that as much, but we sure do.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, we're almost at our 3:30 end, so I just want to really give a big thank you to our presenters for putting that presentation together. And then also Bolton and Menk for their intro slideshow presentation that was on when you guys joined. Hopefully you guys got to see all or at least part of that. So I want to thank the NCITE board for helping me get this going. What else? For more information on any of our committee meetings and upcoming events and our next section meetings, you can always find that information on our website. We'll also be sending out more mailers for you guys as soon as we have those items planned. And as always, as soon as we can meet in person again, we will be doing that. We'll let you know as soon as we have that information. What else? Oh, Jacob and Matt, I do have presenter gifts for you that I would present to you at this time, but they will be in the mail, so they're safely delivered to you without me having to go to Fargo or into the office to deliver those. So with that, if anyone has any final thoughts, feel free to chime in.
And if questions do come up later on too, feel free to email myself or Matt. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have about the project. Hoping once the summer comes around and some of that vegetation along the corridor has established, we can get some updated drone footage too. So that should be to get the real look of the corridor with the streetscaping elements.
Yeah, I know I've never been up to Fargo, but I did have a conference that was one of the first things canceled off my schedule last March. So hopefully the ATSA annual meeting will be rescheduled and we'll all be back up there to see Fargo in person.
If you do, take a drive down Main Avenue.
Will do. All right, I think we're all set, everyone. Thank you for joining.